Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Ware Russell, and I am here with my co host, Josh Davidson. And out of my surprise, my Canadian friend showed up, Dale Money Metal Glover. What's up, brother?
Hey, David, how's it going?
Good, 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 good. And we have a special guest. He's no stranger to Pora, but this is his first time on Faith Unaltered. So give him a round of applause. Evan Minton, how you doing, brother? Oh, you're muted, brother.
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure, man. Always love doing shows with you and hearing what you got to say, especially when you were in that debate with I think it was David Johnson. You guys went at it pretty good. Yeah, that was quite a doozy. But yeah, Evan always has awesome things to say, and he's here tonight to present the maximal data argument for Jesus' resurrection and making it look attractive. So, Evan, tell us just a little bit about the argument or the position itself.
Just before
Yeah,
before
so
you,
Oh,
okay. I
good.
just wanted to ask, like when did you debate David Johnson? Like, is that on Pora or where can I see that debate?
Pora.
yeah,
Pora.
I think that was like I want to say 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
ago.
Okay, so it's pretty old. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it's an old one.
All
Yeah,
right,
Dale
cool.
Dale Dale actually was the original host for Skeptics and Seekers, where David Johnson came from. But, anyways, yeah, just tell us a little bit about the argument itself
Yeah,
or the
so there
position.
yeah, so there are basically two approaches to historically establishing the resurrection of Jesus. The most popular and well known is the minimal facts approach, which is championed by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona. And I just found out that he released volume one of his magnum opus on that. And that's just another book going on my long list of things I want to read. But the maximal data approach, so the minimal facts approach, and I get into this in my slides and my talk. There's actually, I did a study on the gospel's reliability, uh, doing a really deep dive to prepare an 11 article series, which accidentally kind of turned into a book that I put on the blog. I didn't expect it to be that in depth, but while I was doing so, I went on a little excursus and I looked into the whole minimal facts versus maximal data debate. Because these two approaches have pretty much become rivals, like Star Wars and Star Trek, where if you're in one camp, then you're against the other one. And I'm like, well, Lydia McGrew, she is like the champion today of the maximal data argument, as like Michael Licona is for the minimal facts approach. I was like, well, what are her reasons for thinking the minimal facts argument is bad? So I started to, I read her articles, watched some of her videos. I did not end up agreeing with her. I still think the minimal facts approach is a good argument. And I wrote some blog articles responding to her. But at the same time, I had the minimal facts people had objections to the maximal data approach, namely that it was too inefficient, that it took too long to unpack. Minimal facts uses historical facts that meet two criteria. They have a lot of criteria of authenticity based arguments in their favor, and they are facts that nearly all scholars uh, would accept, even non-Christian scholars, all New Testament biblical historical scholars. And these would be facts like Jesus's death by crucifixion, his empty tomb. His disciples claimed and believed that they saw Jesus alive after his death. Uh, Saul of Tarsus converted on the basis of what he believed to be an appearance of the risen Jesus, and so on. And you can get these facts using the criteria of authenticity, like multiple attestation, embarrassment, um, to establish these, these facts. And then you argue that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation of these facts. Now, the maximal data argument takes the Gospels as reliable eyewitness testimony and uses, and that's the premise on which you argue for the resurrection. They're basically, they're eyewitness testimonies. They are accurate and they are trustworthy sources, as opposed to a minimal facts approach, which at best says we're going to take a neutral stance on whether the Gospels are reliable.
Right on, man. Well, that sounds. I mean, this is like right up our alley too. I mean, as apologists, we love resurrection arguments. I know Dale and me, we both enjoy a lot of Habermas's work. Dale's actually close friends with him. Was actually part of his conversion stuff. But I'll let him tell that because I want to go around the room and just say, "Hey guys, hey Josh, hey Dale, how y'all doing?"
Yeah, I'm doing great. I got the email from Mr. Russell telling me, "Hey, you want to come on?" And absolutely, because the resurrection, I think, is a key topic. As David, you were saying, it was one of the reasons that I converted to Christianity. I was lucky enough to be friends with and work with Dr. Gary Habermas, and Mike Lacona was helpful for me as well. So I'm a big fan of the minimal facts approach. I personally take one thing I'm going to be wanting to ask Evan about is I think there is actually a third approach, and that's the approach that I take, labeled by Caleb Jackson, the moderate facts approach. So I think there's actually a third approach, and that's kind of what the approach that I took in believing in Jesus' resurrection based on the historical evidence. So.
Right on, right on. Josh, man, it's always good to have my good deep thinker on here. So
What's up, man? I'm glad to
yeah,
be here. Had a good day at work today, got quite a few things done this week, and they finally, thank the Lord, they finally were able to hire somebody else to join me in my department, so I'm not by myself. I have help now. And so the overwhelming workload is going to start to hopefully distribute itself a little more evenly now.
yeah.
And I won't feel crazy stressed out every day. But I'm, doing good. Got a lot done. We had a huge volunteer group this Monday of like 50 people from a local church to come in and help paint the chapel with me, and got that done so quickly. It was absurd. It took
That's awesome.
longer to tape off the building and clean up than it did to paint the whole thing. There was so many people. So I've been really blessed this week, man. I'm doing really good.
That's good. Yeah, I think you told us a little bit about that last week about your friends. So that's like, or your help. That must be a really, really, blessed blessing. To
Man,
yeah.
it is a weight lifted in some real sense. And to be honest with you, even just having the extra hands on one task that I'm doing is worth its weight in gold, let alone being able to split up and get twice as much stuff done. Because like I said, I'm drowning. There's so much stuff that needs to be done all the time.
Right on, right on.
I'm
Yeah,
just
well,
curious,
guys.
David,
Oh yeah,
if Josh is the deep thinker, does that mean I'm the
you're the
shallow?
real seeker.
Oh, I'm the real. Okay,
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm the
Oh man,
Canadian humor. Sorry.
can't
Yeah,
live life
yeah,
by
we got that.
comparison, guys.
You want an award or a cookie or a bag of milk? No, just kidding.
Oh goodness, Evan's
I'm teasing.
why am I on here? Yeah.
Because you love us and we love you too, Dale. I mean, but dude, like for real, I knew this was like right up your alley, and I was like, you know what, Dale would be perfect for this as well because Evan's got some awesome slides that we're about to get to. So, without further ado, Evan, I'm gonna put these slides up here, and you just tell me, and have your freedom, bro. I mean, by all means, just do what you got to do, man.
All right. So this the point of my talk is making the maximal data argument for Jesus' resurrection attractive, a much needed pitch for minimal facts fans. Now, I already explained like what a maximal data approach is and what a minimal facts approach is, and I think both arguments are good. I like both. I like both of them. I spent almost a year just studying the topic of gospel reliability in preparation for an 11-part blog article series, which also became a podcast series. I recorded myself reading the blog articles and made sort of a pseudo audio book. And in the process of that, I studied like sort of this in-house debate, this tension that I've seen like kind of rising up for several years. why, the minimal facts versus the maximal data approach. They tend to be like people who use one usually don't like the other. And I looked at some of the arguments against the minimal facts approach from Lydia McGrew. I still think the minimal facts approach is a sound argument. But I also had objections to the maximal data approach that a lot of minimal facts proponents have. Even Dr. Michael Licona, he brought up that objection in his radio talk with Braxton Hunter on Trinity Radio, that it's just too efficient. It just takes too long to unpack. Like, you basically have to write a whole book whenever you want to defend just the resurrection of Jesus. And I've not really seen a satisfying response to what I have termed the efficiency objection from maximalists like Lydia McGrew, Tim McGrew, Eric Manning, David Paulman, etc. But they did say some things that, when I was sitting on my back porch after I got done with all the research and just sifting through it in my head, I kind of put the pieces together, and I was like, oh, so that's okay. Yeah. Okay. I can see how that works. It's not really as that. If this is how you can unpack it, if you have like 5 minutes at a bus stop. Next slide. So one thing I have found is, when it comes to the minimal facts, is that there really is no one approach. And Dale kind of foreshadowed this. There's what I call the bare minimum facts version, or the Lyconian version. Lycona uses 3 and sometimes only 1 minimal fact to make his case. He'll use 1, Jesus' death by crucifixion; 2, the disciples claim to have seen Jesus alive afterwards; and 3, Paul's conversion. Sometimes he will try to make his case only using the postmortem appearances to the disciples. And during the course of my investigation, I think that this version of the argument is really the ones that people like Lydia McGrew point their cannons towards. And I myself am kind of skeptical that this very thinnest minimal facts approach can work. Next slide. But the minimal facts approach I still think does work is the one that I've been using all along. And it is what Caleb Jackson has termed the moderate facts approach. Now, you will see the moderate facts approach being used by people like Gary Habermas and William Lane Craig. Gary Habermas and Michael Licona both use the moderate facts approach in their book, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. It's a popular level book. I read it back in 2014. It's the book that made me fall in love with this approach. Now, Habermas and Craig, they defend 5 or more minimal facts, historical facts. Habermas includes Jesus's death, his empty tomb, his postmortem appearances to his disciples, the appearance to Paul, and the appearance to James. And William Lane Craig will even include things like the burial of Jesus, and the fact that the origin of the disciples' beliefs, given the cultural milieu of the time, that needs to be explained. And unlike the very strict version I just showed on the previous slide, this one does not require scholarly consensus in the 90s. It just has to be a majority. So the empty tomb, which previously I heard Gary Habermas say it was 75%, but I've heard scholarly acceptance has gone up to maybe 84. That's good enough for a moderate facts approach. Next slide. So again, there's 2 different approaches, and I've already talked about this. So, but there's minimal facts approaches. There's like several different versions of that. Then there's the maximal data approach, which it uses the Gospels, it defends their reliability, and it makes the case for Jesus' resurrection, among other historic Christian truth claims from the Gospels being eyewitness testimonies. Next slide. And unlike on a minimal facts approach, there is no restriction in a maximalist case. Scholarly headcount does not matter. If you are using data that most scholars accept, you can use that. If a very tiny minority accepts it, you can use that. What really matters is whether or not the arguments are good. So things like traditional authorship, not a majority consensus, but you can use that in a maximal data approach. The argument from undesigned coincidences, you can. That's not very popular among New Testament scholars, even evangelicals. But if you think it's a good argument and you want to use it, you can use it. There's no limit. That's why it's called the maximal data approach. It's the name, like a lot of names, is a little bit misleading, as I'm going to say in a few moments. It doesn't mean you have to give all of the evidence that the Gospels are trustworthy and accurate and true. You don't have to make an exhaustive case in one sitting. It just means that there's no ceiling of evidence that you're limited to use. Like in a court of law, it's not like some evidence is inadmissible. On a minimal facts approach, some evidence is inadmissible, but on a maximal data approach, it isn't. Next slide. So, what does a maximalist case require and what does it not require? Well, here is the impression that I was under for most of my apologetic career. It does not require you to basically write a book every time you want to defend Jesus's resurrection. You don't necessarily have to get into extra biblical sources. Like, look at all of the things that the New Testament writers talk about. Josephus corroborates that, and Tacitus also talks about Jesus doing this, and so does Mara Serapion. And look at all of these archaeological findings that corroborate these places and these persons and these events. And look at all these undesigned coincidences, the internal evidence that shows that they were eyewitnesses that were committed to telling the truth. And look at the New Testament we have today, is based on the textual evidence, is 99% the same as what was originally written. And also all of this evidence for traditional authorship and so on and so forth. You don't have to unpack all of that. And that's basically what I and a lot of minimal facts defenders thought we had to do. And I'm being honest. That's why I fell in love with the minimal facts approach. I'm like, this approach is just so much easier, because I cut my teeth on Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ, and when I would try to present some of that evidence to my non-believing interlocutors, I found myself overwhelmed. I'm like, I have to remember and regurgitate so much. And when I read Lacona and Habermas's book, I'm like, oh, this is just such a better way to do it. But no, there is a short version of the argument. Next slide. So, what if you only have 15 minutes in an opening speech of a debate? Like David Paulman. David Paulman debated Godless Engineer, and he was using a maximal data approach. How did he trim that down to 15 minutes? Or what if you have only 30 minutes or an hour with someone on a plane? How can you simply give a brief here's how you do it. You can give a brief defense of the traditional authorship of the Gospels, and then you can use what I call the Magruian trilemma. Next slide. The Magruian trilemma is named after the philosopher and Christian apologist Lydia McGrew. It is a 3-step syllogism. 1, the Gospel authors were either lying, mistaken, or were telling the truth. 2, the Gospel authors were not lying or mistaken. 3, therefore, the Gospel authors were telling the truth. This is a logically valid syllogism. The conclusion follows from the premises by the law of disjunctive syllogism. So if you can get your interlocutor to agree that the Gospels were written by Matthew, John, Mark, who got his information from Peter, then you can run these were the people who were there. They lived with Jesus. They walked with Jesus. They said, after Jesus died, some crazy stuff happened. He appeared to us and started talking, and he showed us his hands. And then, this is what they say in their testimonies, in the Gospels. But why are they saying what they're saying? Why are they saying Jesus got up out of his grave and talked to them and ate fish and did all this stuff? Well, these are the three options. They were either making it up, they thought it was true, but they weren't, or it really happened. Next slide. So what you would do is you would defend the traditional authorship, and there's lots of ways you can do this. You can appeal to things like the patristic evidence, church fathers who say they were very close to the events, very close in time and space, and we're in a position to know whether or not Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew, John wrote the Gospel of John, and so on. And you can appeal to that to make the case that these were probably written by these men. There's internal evidence, and I get into this in my blog article, that, for example, Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, it contains a lot of money talk, and I think if I'm not mistaken, his is the only one that includes the parable of the unmerciful servant. Whereas Luke, he also talks about Peter coming up to Jesus and saying, how many times should I forgive my brother? And 7 times. Jesus says, not just 7 times, but 77 times. Luke includes that teaching of Jesus, as Matthew does. But Matthew goes on to give this long financially themed parable. Well, that's very fitting of a tax collector who he would have been familiar with, taxes, and he would have known how ruthless the Romans were if you couldn't pay your taxes. And he might have felt some guilt of, his time as a tax collector. So that would have stuck out to him. And Matthew would have written that. There's internal evidences like that. There's also, and this is very recent to me, in Brant Petrie's book, The Case for Jesus, he shows the manuscript evidence. There's manuscript evidence that, now they have different titles, but it's very insignificant. So they all attribute the authorship to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but some will say the Gospel according to Matthew, or the Gospel of Matthew, or or just Matthew, Gospel according to John, and so on. They are from the first century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century. All of the manuscripts have the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John on them. And Petrie contrasts this with the book of Hebrews that has a whole bunch of different labels attributing all sorts of different authors. The Hebrews manuscript attributes authorship to Paul and Barnabas and Mark, and some just leave it without a name at all. And Petrie makes the case that this is what real anonymous authorship looks like. And we just don't have that with the Gospels. All of the evidence we have points to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John writing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can get into any of this evidence or all of this evidence, and however, it depends on how much time you have. After that, you present the Magruian trilemma, and then you defend the premises in the Magruian trilemma. Now, how you would defend the premises in the Magruian trilemma is, well, again, if this is the short version of the argument, you can just appeal to some extra biblical evidence for the martyrdom of Peter, who gave his information to Mark, and Mark wrote it down, Matthew, John, and you can argue that they would not die for a lie. They would, Matthew's not going to make up tall tales and then go get himself unalived for those tall tales. Peter's not going to make up stuff and then go get brutally murdered, crucified upside down for something he knew wasn't true. So they weren't lying. And this is what minimal facts proponents do when refuting the stolen body theory. Well, they wouldn't have stolen the body because then they would have known the resurrection was false. But they certainly believed it was true because they all went and got killed for it. You can make the same argument in this case. Other evidences, if you have more time, if you're going to have multiple conversations with your interlocutor, or if you are like writing an 11-part blog series like I am, you can appeal to other evidences to show that they aren't lying. Like Frank Turek, for example, he'll use the criterion of embarrassment in a cumulative way to show to say, look, they were committed to telling the truth. They even included all these embarrassing details about themselves, about Jesus. They included things that would raise theological questions. But you don't have to. If you don't have that much time, you can just say, okay, here's some evidence for their martyrdoms, and they wouldn't die for a lie. So let's move on to the next option. Were they mistaken? And refuting that option is just as simple as looking at the text, looking at what they say, and asking, can anyone really be mistaken about this? Next slide. So I'm talking about traditional authorship, especially because authorship matters, because if it can be demonstrated that the men who followed Jesus for 3 years were actually the ones who penned the Gospels, then it just becomes a matter of scrutinizing their testimony and figuring out why they said what they said. We know what they said. Anyone can read the Gospels and see that they reported Jesus dying on a cross, leaving an empty tomb, and appearing to numerous peoples. But why did they do these things? Did they just make up tall tales? Were they mistaken, or were they telling the truth? Well, you show the evidence of their martyrdom. They weren't lying. But what about the mistaken option? Now, here, there's a myriad of possible theories. The most common one is the hallucination view. And as I said in my conference talk, I think the minimal facts approach can do away with the hallucination theory. But it can only drive a dagger in the heart of the hallucination theory. The maximal data approach drops a nuclear bomb on it. Because you don't just have multiple group appearances, Jesus appearing to multiple people on multiple different occasions, but you have him doing and saying different things to all of these multiple groups of people on multiple different occasions. Hallucinations, they are kind of like dreams. They are the manifestation of your brain. Your brain is projecting something into the external world that's not actually there. So you can't have a scenario where you wake up one night, you turn over to your spouse and say, honey, I'm having a great dream. We are in Hawaii. Let's both go back to sleep. We'll have the same dream. We'll save money on, gas, hotel rooms, airfare. It'll be great. It would be great if we could do that, but we can't, because dreams are a product of one's mind, and hallucinations are the same way. Now, the person who proposes the hallucination theory, and I'm singling this one out because it is the most popular naturalistic theory that skeptics like to tout. What they're asking us to believe is that Jesus appeared to the disciples multiple times. He appeared to, and when he appeared to them, they all saw him, and they all agreed that he was doing and saying the exact same things. He ate fish in front of them. He invited them to touch him. Jesus had long conversations with them. Oh yeah, and his body is gone from the tomb. This is not, you will not find this kind of thing in the psychological literature. Grandma may see Grandpa, the ghost of Grandpa, show up for maybe 5 minutes to say, I am doing well, honey, I am okay, and then he'll leave. but he's not going to show up to grandma and all of her friends in the knitting club, and then not just once but multiple times, and he's going to eat some of the fish that grandma prepared for her knitting club. that just doesn't happen. You can't be mistaken about that kind of thing. And so I don't think they were lying or mistaken, and by process of elimination, that means that they were telling the truth. Next slide. So, okay, I think I got a little bit ahead of myself slide-wise. Just skip to the next slide. So, yeah, if time permits, you can refute the lying hypothesis with more evidence than just the extra biblical evidence for their martyrdom, if you want to. And like I said, such evidence includes, things like extra biblical corroboration, Josephus, Tacitus, archaeological findings, etc., confirming persons and events reported in the Gospels, internal evidences like undesigned coincidences, unexplained illusions. You can make a cumulative case from the criterion of embarrassment. There's really a lot you can say, but you don't have to say all of it if you only have 15 minutes in a debate or 5 minutes at a bus stop. Next slide. And again, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I was too busy actually giving the talk, and I forgot to go through the slides. But on the slide, I'm just saying that when it comes to the mistaken option, it's a matter of scrutinizing their testimony and asking, can you be wrong? Can you be wrong about this kind of thing? Can you hallucinate? You and your whole friends hallucinate Jesus saying the exact same thing, eating fish, being touched for a period of 40 days, mind you. The hallucinations just aren't like this. One person may see their loved one for 5 minutes and then it's over. Next slide. So here's another surprising thing I found during the course of my studies and my conversations. Does the minimal facts approach have a dialectical advantage over the maximal data approach? Well, on the minimal facts approach, you will spend loads and loads of time defending the historicity of the minimal facts if you're arguing with a layman. There's a person who frequents the Cerebral Faith Facebook page and the blog, and we've had conversations on. We've been talking for 7 or 8 years, and we've had conversations on just about everything multiple times. And we finally got to talking about the resurrection. I used a minimal facts approach, and I could not get him to concede even one argument for, say, the empty tomb or the postmortem appearances to the disciples. And I would defend one argument for one minimal fact for comments and comments and comments and comments until I would eventually give up and say, well, I guess you don't like this argument for this minimal fact, but there's other reasons to think Jesus's tomb was empty. And so I would go to them, and I couldn't get him to concede the point there. And it was just really dragged out. Now, on the maximal data approach, you will also spend loads and loads of time trying to, say, convince the skeptic that the Gospels are eyewitness testimony. What advantage is there, really? Now, if you're a New Testament scholar and you're arguing with a skeptical New Testament scholar, then sure. You might not have to defend as much because your interlocutor will probably concede all of your points, and it'll just be a matter of, well, how do you best explain it? But if you're arguing with the average Joe, or you're not arguing with a scholar, there's really no advantage here. What good is it to use data that most scholars accept if most laymen reject them? You might as well just use the maximal data approach and use data that even some of the scholars will dispute. Next slide. Now, on a minimal facts approach, you have to refute the spiritual resurrection theory by means of Pauline exegesis, examination of anastasis in its historical context, and then apply that to the claims of the disciples. In a maximal data argument, you can refute the spiritual resurrection theory just by pointing to the very physical descriptions of Jesus in the Gospels. For example, in Luke chapter 24, verses 36 to 39. Now, in my blog article series, I spent when I talked about the resurrection of Jesus, and I talked about the idea that maybe Jesus was there, but he was just a ghost. I refuted that in one paragraph. Now, granted, that was building on several articles where I made a case for the gospel's reliability, but still, if you're giving a short form, you can still do this, because if you give a brief defense of the traditional authorship and you're going through the Magruian trilemma, then you say, well, he couldn't have been a ghost because of what they said he was doing. Now, I know that people like Dale Allison will say that these were probably like embellishments, and I deal with that in my series. I don't think I think that works only if you don't agree that the gospels were written by eyewitnesses, and if they were written rather late. But if they're written by the men who lived with Jesus and walked with him, and if they were early, and I think they are written fairly early, most of them pre-60, then I don't think that explanation really works, because at that point you're pretty much saying that they were either lying or just, misremembering. Next slide. So what about contradictions? That's another point that minimal facts bros worry about. One thing that attracted me to the minimal facts approach was, well, I'm not arguing from reliability, and so I really don't need to focus on all of these so-called contradictions. Well, I asked Eric Manning. Actually, I just put it out there on Facebook, and I tagged Eric Manning, I tagged David Paulman, and I was like, how do you guys use this argument and not just get distracted on all these rabbit trails trying to harmonize all of these different points in the Gospels that the skeptics say contradicts? And I'm not going to read his response in full, because it's kind of a lengthy response, and just like in my conference talk, I think I might be going over time. But basically, in a nutshell, he said that the positive evidence for the gospel's reliability overshadows any negative force that contradictions would have, even if we, granted for the sake of the argument that they were genuine contradictions. And also, they're in the peripheral details. And I can appeal to J. Warner Wallace, who says when it comes, he's interviewed so many eyewitnesses at crime scenes over the course of his career as a homicide detective, and he says this is just the way eyewitness testimony works. When you have multiple people who see the same thing, you're going to get differences in their testimony, but that doesn't mean that the thing didn't happen. So basically, now you can get to harmonizing if you want to. Again, it depends on, is this a person you're going to have multiple conversations with? Is there time, or are you just trying to get it out there? But if you don't have time to go, how many women were at the tomb? What time was it when they got to the tomb, and so on. You can just say, look, I'm just making a positive case here. I think the positive case overwhelms any force that contradictions might have, and also this level of divergence in testimony is expected if these are eyewitnesses telling about something that actually happened. Next slide. That's the post that I made. Next slide. And that is that is part of Eric Manning's response. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so if you want to really dig into the specific reasons on why the Gospels can be trusted, why they're eyewitness testimony, and so on, there are some resources I can give you. There's free. The first I'm going to mention are free resources, and then I'm going to go to the paid resources, the resources you have to buy. First, I want to plug my 11-part blog series. It's called The Case for the Reliability of the Gospels. It's on cerebralfaith.net. And like I said, it's like a book. Each article is like a book chapter. The one on traditional authorship is the longest. The little coffee cup up at the top near the title tells you how long it should take you to get through it. And that one says 100 minutes. So I go really in depth in each of these articles. But if you don't want to read all of that, you can listen to it on the Cerebral Faith podcast. I can't remember the episode numbers, but they were fairly recent. They were in the 160s. And you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, or you can just access it from the website's podcast player. Third free resource I would recommend is Eric Manning's entire YouTube channel, Testify. He has both short videos as well as longer videos on various different gospel reliability issues. And it's just great. I binged his channel while doing my prep work, and it's a good resource to go to. Next slide. Now, some of the paid resources I recommend are the Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Up here on the PowerPoint, I have the movie edition, which is an updated edition from the one I read as a 19-year-old. There's Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. Now, I have not read this version that I have up on screen, but I have read the first edition. This is the updated and expanded version. And this is a really cool book. It's like a hybrid between a detective novel and an apologetics book. It's a very unique way to read a defense for the gospel's reliability. There's also Hidden in Plain View by Lydia McGrew. It's the whole book is just about undesigned coincidences and how that supports gospel reliability. There's Lydia McGrew's book, The Mirror or the Mask, Liberating the Gospels from Literary Devices. Next slide. There's her book, The Eye of the Beholder, which the Gospel of John as historical reportage. And then there's Craig Blomberg's books, The Case for the Reliability of the Gospels, The Historical Reliability of John's Gospel, and Brant Petrie's book, The Case for Jesus, where I learned some arguments for traditional authorship that I hadn't heard prior to reading that book. And so that is the end of the presentation.
Awesome. Great job.
Hey, right on. I like that, man. That was cool.
Thanks.
Right on. Yeah, man. It was good, man. I'm going to go around the room, guys. Dale, do you have any questions? I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I had 4. You addressed one of them in the presentation, so that was great. Out of curiosity, would I be able to post up your PowerPoint slides on my blog for the audience on this show? Because I think they're really well done. So
thanks. Yeah, you can do that. I'll send you a Google Drive link after after this is over, and yeah, you can do that.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So here are my questions. So I was interested in McGrew's trilemma. Now I was kind of wondering, there may be a 4th option. So I'm kind of wondering what your take is here, because so you said they're either lying or they're mistaken or they're telling the truth. But what about like Mike Licona, who argues for certain rhetorical devices? Well, using rhetorical devices isn't exactly lying. It's not a mistake. But yet the details they're reporting aren't necessarily true or accurate historically speaking. So is that maybe a fourth option, use of certain ancient literary devices, do you think? Or
Well, I would say that would fall under the lying option, and I think Lydia McGrew just I read Lycona's book first. I read them back to back, and I think McGrew just absolutely tears his thesis to shreds. When I first read Lycona's book, I thought, okay, this sounds kind of plausible, and then I read McGrew's book right after that, and I'm like, why did I think that was plausible? But no, even Lycona wouldn't say that they were lying about the appearances or the tomb or anything like that. His theory might say something like, John depicts Mary Magdalene as being the only one at the tomb because he wants to make it, maybe more cinematic feeling, more emotional. You have this conversation between Jesus and Mary that kind of didn't actually take place in any recognizable form in history. It's just his literary way of just, kind of, dramatizing the event. But he would still say, yeah, Mary still saw Jesus. Jesus rose from the dead, but John just kind of spiced up the story a little bit. So I wouldn't really see that as a fourth option. I think it would fall under the lying option, but I don't think I don't think the whole literary devices thing, I don't think that debate really becomes relevant until you get to the issue of how do we deal with supposed contradictions. And that's where someone like McGrew and Lycona would disagree on how to handle these things. And Lycona would say, well, it's these literary devices, whereas McGrew would result to harmonization techniques.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, thank you. And that's kind of leading me into the second question, because I was listening, your take on the contradictions and stuff like that. So what I wanted to ask you about is it could be possible for even an eyewitness, granting that we have a reliable eyewitness writing down the Gospels. Couldn't it be possible that they get the main things right? Like the appearance to the tomb, all of the minimal facts that Mike Lacona would grant or Gary Habermas or whatever, but they could still be mistaken on secondary details. So like, and you seem to grant that could be the case when you dealt with contradictions. So that's kind of leading to a little bit confusion. Like I thought a maximal facts approach has to take all of the facts of the maximal case, like all the secondary details that guard at the tomb has to be true. The fact that Jesus ate and touched and saw, and each appearance narrative is all historical. So did you want to just kind of clarify that? Does a maximal facts approach have to accept all the secondary details, or is the difference it still accepts the same number of facts, but the way that it gets there is different somehow?
So, like, I don't think you have to defend. So it's important to distinguish between reliability and inerrancy. And someone like, I think McGrew is probably the best test case because she says, I do not affirm biblical inerrancy. There are a couple of things that she thinks are errors in the Gospels. One of them being the whole centurion son, Jesus healing his son incident. She thinks that one of them really did goof that up because she doesn't think the traditional explanations of, well, even though they depict the centurion as coming himself, it was really the Jewish leaders, and since the Jewish leaders were speaking for him, it was okay to talk about it as though the centurion himself spoke, kind of like if if somebody read a statement from the president, we would say the president said ... But she says that doesn't really work because the Greek grammar kind of presupposes in Matthew's, I think it's is it Matthew's account that doesn't talk about the Jewish leaders? She says like there's the Greek language there has the plural, implying that Jesus is speaking to a group. But so insofar as like the supposed contradictions, you can reconcile them if you want to, if you have time with your interlocutor, or you can just say the positive evidence overwhelms them. And insofar as details like Jesus eating and talking, I don't think that these are the kinds of things that you would misremember. Jesus is so involved, and he doesn't just show up for like 5 minutes and then leaves. He does a bunch of stuff, and he doesn't just eat fish on one occasion. There's 2 different accounts of him having a meal with his disciples. It would be kind of hard if this was written by someone who was there. This is the kind of thing that would stick with you your whole life. It's what psychologists would call an impact event. It's like if you, I don't know if all of us are old enough to remember 9/11, but I can tell you exactly what I was doing, where I was, what kind of TV we had, and what room it was. I could tell you so many details about that day and some of the stuff that followed it, because planes don't crash into buildings every day.
And dead people don't eat, right?
Yeah, and dead people don't come back and eat your fish. So it would be kind of hard for that to be a goof up.
Well, zombies eat brains, so we know that.
Yeah.
So Jesus wasn't a zombie because he didn't eat brains.
Exactly.
So last question for me, and then I'll turn it over to the next one. This one's kind of an easy one, but it's something that I found interesting. Because you mentioned that scholarly consensus is a key component of the minimal facts, but you don't like to appeal to it because lay people don't really care. But I actually would say no. I think appeal to a scholarly consensus is kind of a quick heuristic way for lay people, right? Because especially if we're including enemy attestation, like, atheist scholars and stuff like that. I think for the layman, if you're just giving a quick little 5-minute thing on the side of the street, mentioning that, hey, look, even atheist scholars, they agree with that. That's a helpful heuristic for people. Do you think that it could be, depending on how it's used, it could be helpful?
I think it's a helpful rhetorical device that you can use to aid in a debate, to say, hey, look, it's not just me and my fundamentalist friends who are saying these things. Even people and scholars in your camp affirm some of these things. And I think it can, and I think it can help to open the doors. But when I said like using a scholarly consensus doesn't have an advantage, I was more appealing to the fact that in a minimal facts approach, most of the data points, like the people Michael Licona and Gary Habermas debate, they're going to agree with those facts. It's just going to be what theory best accounts for them, and you're going to get into like metaphysical arguments regarding the possibility of miracles, probability, and things of that sort. But the facts in need of explanation are just going to be granted by the critic. But not if you're debating a layman, like I often do. They're going to just shoot. A lot of them will even dispute the very existence of Jesus, and you'll have to convince them of that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to, if you can't just say, okay, here's the facts, how do we explain them? But you have to argue until you're blue in the face for those facts. Why not use And I do think the maximal data is strong. Why not use the stronger argument if you're going to have to argue until you're blue in the face because your skeptic won't concede even the tiniest point anyway?
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Over to whoever, Josh, I guess you're next, or whoever is next.
Well, I was actually going to ask about the last bit that you had said. You were talking about needing to argue till you're blue in the face. And it's like, I think for both camps, at least we can concede that you would have to start much further upstream, right? And kind of get your way down to where you're like, okay, now I'm closing the gap. We're getting to here. This is the point. But I have to start all the way over here to establish everything necessary to get to the point, right? Especially if you're talking to somebody like you said, who's not like been in a field of study or something like that's going to expose them to all the things necessary to be like this and that. This part is reasonable. We all agree here, or this part is what's really in question. And like you said, some people, their skepticism has become this like odd, like rule of thumb of I don't want to concede anything, right? I want to try to pick even the smallest thing apart, and I have to get to the most minute detail in order to establish anything. And it's like you never actually get to a bigger picture of something if you get so far zoomed in. It's like trying to look at every drop of paint on a painting to understand what the painting is. Like you have to zoom out. You just have to. So at some point you kind of have to go to this like here's the main point, right? So if you were going to like zoom out, right, and just say here's the main point, is the main point of both of these approaches the exact same ending place, and you're using a different journey to get there in the conversation with somebody, like applicably, right? I'm not talking about practically speaking, not like the steps of the how you learn to do it, but like when you're employing this, right? You're talking to somebody, let's say if even a stranger for the first time, and you're like, here's my main point, here's the broad scope of my main point. That's going to be identical basically to the person who's using the minimal facts, right? You're just saying if this person, if I'm going to have to start upstream with this person, I need to use the most the best tools available to build the structure that I need to make my main case, right? Am I following?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So both arguments, they have like a two-stage structure. So in a minimal facts approach, you have establishing the minimal facts, and you can give one or two criteria based arguments for each of them, and then you're like, well, I think the best explanation is the resurrection. What do you think, Mr. Skeptic? And in a maximal data approach, it's like, okay, the Gospels are our best sources, and they were written by men who were there. And here are some reasons why we can know that these were written by these people. Um, so now that we have to ask, why did they say that? Were they lying? Were they mistaken? Or were they telling the truth? And in a minimal facts approach, step 2 is refuting all the naturalistic theories that try to account for each brick, as Gary Habermas would say. In step 2 of the maximal data argument, it's more or less the same. You're refuting naturalistic theories. You're saying why no, it can't be hallucination. No, Jesus didn't just swoon on the cross, and here's why the medical evidence shows he couldn't have possibly survived. And even if he did, they wouldn't have seen, David Strauss's critique. They wouldn't have seen a brutally maimed Jesus as being the risen Lord of life. And that's just the short version of the argument. Is basically minimal facts is we're taking a neutral stance on the gospel's reliabilities. We're leaning very heavily on Paul's letters and his creed, which you can employ that stuff as well in a maximal data approach, because again, there's no limit. You can bring in Paul as an extra witness if for some reason if you want to just add on more. And it's really the maximal data argument. I kind of wish it had a different name, but McGrew's term has stuck. I would like to call it the gospel eyewitness approach, because basically that's what you're doing. You're arguing the gospels are eyewitness testimonies. They're truthful eyewitnesses and this is why we can believe that Jesus, claimed to be God. He died and he rose again.
Right on. Josh, you got anything else?
No, Dale pretty much stole my other question. So no, I actually really enjoyed that presentation though. Like I really I was listening, like it didn't feel like we had gotten through that many slides yet. It felt over faster than I expected because I saw he had sent me beforehand the amount of slides and I was reading through them, but the way that you presented it felt much faster than I was expecting. So it was actually really cool and really fluid. I really enjoyed that a lot. So thank you for all of the work and preparation to make that. That was really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Evan, down to me. I wanted to get into as you're talking about defending authorship, right?
Mhm.
How best do you establish authorship, and how do we know who actually wrote the Gospels? How can we get into that and kind of breach it without writing a book? Because for me, it's like being able to establish authorship. Oh, we might have lost him.
What?
He doesn't
Did
want
we
to
lose you?
My back?
Oh,
There he is.
oh, you're back. Okay. Yeah. So how do we go about it? Because you get arguments like, okay, the Gospels are anonymous, right? Or, things like that. How would you best go about that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. The most common way, and this is what you'll see in a lot of the books, is appeals to the patristic evidence, Polycarp, Ignatius, Tertullian, and their testimonies that these guys wrote these books, and that's pretty strong. But if you want to just kind of spit it out and get it out there, I think the manuscript evidence that Brant Petrie talks about in his book is probably the fastest way to do it. You have all of these and he has a good chart in his book where he shows all of these different manuscripts from like the second century, third century, fourth century, all the way down to like the 14th century, and of course the earliest ones are the most important, but they are all unanimous. The manuscripts are not anonymous, and what the original copies may or may not have had their names written at the top, but the manuscripts that scribes produced, they all had the names of the authors up at the top, kind of like in our modern Bibles. Gospel according to Matthew, Gospel according to John, Gospel according to Luke. It's without fail, they may attribute the authorship using different words. They may not say according to. They may say the Gospel of, or they may just have the name they may just say Luke, Mark. And then you can contrast that, as Petrie does, with attribution to Hebrews. The Hebrews, its manuscripts, some of them attribute the authorship to Paul, some to Luke, some to Barnabas, and some just leave it anonymous. And as far as patristic evidence goes, I can't remember who said it, but one of them said, "Who wrote the book of Hebrews? Only God knows." But
Do you think
nobody.
that weakens the case for reliability for the book of Hebrews? Is that what the implication would be? Being anonymous, I mean, like
Well, I
in
don't.
general, if a book is anonymous, is it less reliable?
Well,
Is that
that would be an issue. I think that would be a question of like canonicity and theology, but from a historical perspective with concerns to the Gospels and what they report, that would
because they're eyewitness
not be
testimonies?
relevant. But it does show that if the Gospels were anonymous, as people like Bart Ehrman like to claim, why doesn't the manuscript evidence look like what we have with Hebrews? Why aren't there conflicting opinions like there is with Hebrews? So, the early church fathers attributed Hebrews to Paul, Barnabas. So, and then there was that one guy who said, I give up. I don't know. Only God knows. But when it comes to the Gospels, everyone just attributed them to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John without question. Another argument you could give is a logical one. It's not a textual one. When you look at the apocryphal Gospels, they attribute authorship to some really big names. The Gospel of Mary, I mean, whether that be Mary Magdalene or Jesus's mother, either one is a very big figure. The Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas. But when it comes to the canonical Gospels, the first century Gospels, you have two of them. One of them's written by Mark. He's barely mentioned in the book of Acts. He just has a few lines written about him. He traveled with Paul and Barnabas a little bit. And then you have Luke, who, I mean, he wasn't an eyewitness. Mark wasn't an eyewitness. And Luke is barely talked about at all. He's name dropped a couple of times in Paul's epistles. And well, I mean, I think he implicitly mentions himself in the we passages, but of the book of Acts. But if you were just making up authors to put on the Gospels, Mark and Luke are just not the names you would make up. Matthew, I mean, yes, he was one of the 12, but Matthew, everyone agrees, because you just read it and it's obvious that it was directed to a Jewish audience. That's why he appeals to all of this Old Testament prophecy. You're going to say that Matthew, the one who was a tax collector and worked for the hated Romans who oppressed the Jews, we want to say this guy wrote this book because the Jews are going to listen to him. I don't think so. The only one that really makes sense is John, because he was, the beloved disciple. He was, and he was one of the 12, and he didn't have a nasty background like Matthew did, but he's the odd one out. The other ones are just not names that I can conceive of the early church making up, unless these are actually the people who wrote these books.
I've got a couple extra questions. If you're done, when you're done.
Well, no, I was going to follow up and be like, just kind of nerd out a little bit, is like, to Josh's point and to Evan's point, we can kind of nerd out here, is that I always usually say, what Gospels aren't, what manuscripts are you talking about that have no authorship claim to them or attributed to them? Because there aren't none, right? I also thought E.P. Sanders gave a incredible testimony on why they could have been not anonymous, right? Is because that was a hallmark of the time. People didn't put their names on the top of things a lot of the times, because it showed the prestige of the writings, and it just wasn't a common thing. So I thought that would also lend a lot of credibility to the fact that these Gospels were, and then the fact that the early church attributed them right away without argument is incredible, and like you said, Evan, as well, why attribute Luke to Luke, or why not like a big name? I mean, that's these are crucial questions for historicity and authorship, right? But yeah, Dale, if you got something, go ahead real quick, because I'll follow up with more.
Well, hold on just a second. Just out of curiosity, is there a compilation or a list that we can like have access to of the like a enumerated list of the claims of authorship, like a chart or something that displays these kind of things? Is there some resource that you guys have for that, or is this all just like plain reading from the scholars and kind of accumulative?
I don't have a numbered list or anything, but I do include a lot of quotations from these early church fathers in part 2, technically part 3, because there's an introduction to, it's kind of like a blog book, but I quote the church fathers in what they say, and in the footnote I say, well, this is, I include this the book that the church father wrote where the quote is found in. But So I think that would be the closest thing to what you're looking for.
Yeah, I don't if I don't recall any like specific chart for authorship, but I'm sure they exist. I mean, we probably
Right.
just haven't come across them,
I was gonna say, if anybody who's listening to this knows about that, drop it in the comments. I want to see it.
But Dale, I know you had a follow up there.
Yeah,
And
just
also before you go, Dale, anybody in the audience that has questions, start throwing them out now.
awesome. Yeah, so one thing I'll just contribute on the authorship thing, I guess I'll just add and look, there was no need for names because like in Luke's case, he knows personally Theophilus and he's giving it to him. So there's no question like, hey, I wrote this for you. Like so the authors knew the audiences and the audiences knew the authors. There was no need to write and this is written by John because they knew it, right? They gave it directly to them in some cases. So, or it was delivered in Paul's letters case. It was delivered by Paul's delegates and stuff like that. So, yeah, I just wanted to contribute that. And in terms of a couple questions, my questions are related to the facts and the explanation. So, is that okay, David, or were you still on sources? Or
Well, yeah, I'm still a little bit on sources, but I'm getting into that too as well. But yeah, I was gonna talk about transmission and reliability. Like, we already talked about establishing authorship, right? So, but uh, you said earlier that the maximal data approach, maybe you don't have to go into a lot of the transmission and stuff like that. But don't you kind of like doesn't transmission and reliability doesn't that require identity to establish authenticity?
Well, yeah, you do need that, but if your interlocutor brings that up, and especially if you're talking to like a Mormon or a Muslim, that's one of their favorite arguments to use. Then yeah, you got to get into that. But I found that that's not really used as much anymore. I think because Christian apologists, both scholarly and layman, have done such a good job of, propagating the evidence that hey, it's 99% preserved. I mean, that's just my speculation as to why it's not brought up anymore. I don't know why, but um, I think they're like, yeah, okay. But if someone brings that up and that is one of their arguments, like, again, they're like, well, even if we did know who wrote it, we don't know what they said. Oh, then you can be like, well, yeah, we do know what they said, and you can start citing scholars like Dan Wallace and show that the transmission is pretty reliable, and the only things we don't know about are just very insignificant things, like John in one of his epistles saying, we have peace, so we write so that we can have peace or that you can have peace. Doesn't really affect any major Christian doctrine.
Right, right. So, Dale, I'll let you start off since
cool.
I've already taken 32 questions up.
Okay, so see, I was just wondering. So okay, so I'm gonna again grant the sources and that sort of thing. Just a quick as kind of a list, like I guess with the maximal facts approach that you use, are you able to give kind of a list, like how many things are facts, or if it's easier, are there any things in the Gospels that you say are not facts, if that's easier to?
So, are you asking like, can I like enumerate the historical facts in a similar way that you would in a minimal facts?
Yeah, or if there's too many, like, can you do it the reverse way? Like, are there a few facts that you in the Gospels that you don't use or you don't think can be proven, or I'm just trying to get an idea of what you use as facts.
Well, in part 9 of my blog series, after I give all this, data for why the Gospels can be trusted, who wrote them, etc., part 9 is about the resurrection of Jesus, and I do enumerate things. I don't call them facts, even though I think they are facts, but I enumerate them like details. Detail 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Detail 2, detail 3, and things of that sort. I can't share it because I'm on my smartphone and I have no working computer yet. But anyone who's interested in checking it out can just go to the blog and look at that. So is that kind of like what you're asking for?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right, cool. I'll check out the blog. The other thing I wanted to get your take on very quickly is at the explanatory level. So I know a lot of people like William Lee Craig and that they depend on a cumulative case, right? So you need all whatever facts you accept, whether minimal or maximal, you need all of them in order for that to be sufficient to make it, the resurrection is the best explanation or that sort of thing to make that argument. Or there's some people say, well, look, I can argue the resurrection on the basis of individual facts. Like, for example, the empty tomb, if that's a fact, that alone, I can prove the resurrection or the appearance to Paul or whatever the fact is. Do you think the case for the resurrection explanatorily depends only on a cumulative case, or can we take individual facts and argue for it on that basis?
I think it does. I think it does need to be a cumulative case. Like with the version of the minimal facts approach that like Michael Licona will do in some talks nowadays. I like to call it the one finger push-up approach. I just think that's very weak. I think you need to at least include 3 facts. I think you at least need to include. I think you need to include the empty tomb and the postmortem appearances, and bringing in Paul definitely helps. So I don't think you can just make the case on like one fact, especially like anybody who's just trying to do it on just the empty tomb. That's a really bad idea because an empty tomb by itself is very easy to explain. There's any known number of ways that a body can go missing from the tomb, but you combine an empty tomb with all of these appearances, then it becomes a little bit harder for the naturalist. In a maximal data approach, it would be the explanatory scope would be you have to account for all that they say. Either it's all a lie, and we can rule that out. They died for it. They wouldn't be making it up. And also, you can bring in other reasons of why they were committed to truth if you have time. Any mistaken hypothesis like the hallucination theory, the swoon theory, the twin theory, they have to account for all of the details of their testimony. And I don't think any of them succeed except for the resurrection hypothesis.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to get that because, believe it or not, I actually do think with the appearance to the 12, I do think we can take that as an isolated fact and argue successfully that the resurrection as an explanation is the best. So I think we can use both. We can use the cumulative, but we also have, in the case of the appearance to the 12, we can use that in isolation, so to speak, and argue for it. So, yeah, I just wanted to get your take. So, thank you.
Right on. So this is where I'm going to jump into kind of like the fun questions. So I think we got 1 or 2 from the audience, Josh, that we have. I'll start it off, but so recently I heard, what if they weren't lying? This is, I guess, would address part of your McGrew trilemma there. What if they were writing a Jewish Greek tragedy, a work of fiction? They weren't lying; they're just writing a work of fiction. How would you answer that one?
That really sounds more to me like the historical novel theory. And the problem with that is that just wasn't an existing genre back then. Fiction was a thing, but when you, and this is what led C.S. Lewis to convert, because he's like, I've read mythology, I've read fairy tales, I've read ancient fictional works and medieval fictional works, and the Gospels just don't read like this. Fictional works from back then were like very overly dramatic, really. I mean, they would not pass as good fictional writing by today's standards because they're just so over dramatic. And and then you had historical narratives, which was much more sober and realistic. And C.S. Lewis was like, the Gospels are historical. These things happened, and that was basically. It was because he was a literary guy, and he was like, the Gospels are biographies of this man named Jesus.
Right. Right. So about like a hallucination theory, right? Because you say you spend a lot of time on that. What do you think about Tom Jump's hallucination theory that is like about grief group hallucinations?
Um, the so like what is his
So it's basically he puts out some cases where groups have group hallucinations that are the same. Like, yeah, they see the person eating and doing stuff like that. So what would you say to and they're caused by grief. Like everybody is grief, so they experience the hallucination together.
well, I've I'm not as familiar with Tom Jump's material as I am other skeptics. So
Well, yeah, just you can answer from that point too.
that's kind of new to me. I will say, even if there have been some group grief hallucinations, well, this would be very bad for a minimal facts approach, because you don't have those details. You just have generic appearances, and if you can have that kind of thing happen, then that kind of makes it. If you're running a minimal facts approach, that would kind of make that a more plausible theory. But a maximal data approach can say, okay, well, what? I mean, I'd have to know the exact details. Did they all agree that that he was saying and doing this person the exact same things, that they were going in the exact same places in the room identically, or were they just all seeing the same guy? Uh, kind of like, I might see my mother, sitting on the couch, and my dad might see her um, on the other side of the room in the recliner or something.
Right. So you would look for disparity as well
and
in the accounts.
like, were these just like 2 minutes long, or did they last for 40 days?
Right, exactly.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I've not heard of that before. If that's actually true, then maybe Lydia McGrew is right. Maybe we need to stop using a minimal facts approach, because on a minimal facts approach, all you have are just these group appearances, and you don't have any specific details, like, oh, they all agreed that he was saying and eating and doing the same things for extended periods of time, which is how I'm responding to Jump's thesis right now.
Right. Right, absolutely. Well, Josh, do you want to get into the starred comments that we have? These are just nerd questions. They don't have anything to do with the resurrection, I don't think. But
Well, they're kind of they're basically just
apologetics.
vaguely apologetics based questions, yeah, but kind of more advice questions from Encouraged Faith. Encouraged Faith. He says, "Do you find some skeptics only want to talk about Genesis? I have an Ivy League learned friend who is an astrophysicist and only wants to debate data regarding creation and the Genesis account." And David asked for clarification because he asked for a suggestion and said, "Are you a young Earth creationist?" And he said, "Yes, I lean that way. I'm not so concerned about the number or age of the Earth. I'm more concerned with the belief of a personal creator creating the cosmos." So, do you have any recommendations for a scenario like that?
So I haven't really run into a skeptic that only wants to talk about that. Like, if you try to get him to talk about something else, he'll bring the conversation back to that. I do find that especially among internet skeptics, that's like that's like the one place they love to go the most. And I think it is something worth talking about. But I do think that it's not super important with regards to, say, the historicity of Jesus's resurrection. I mean, the data we've talked about is not going to disappear if evolution is true and Genesis 1 can't be reconciled with that. That's not going to disappear. That's going to affect inerrancy. That's going to have to cause us to recalibrate our view of inspiration. But it's not going to make the historical data for the the trustworthiness of the Gospels and the implications for Christianity there disappear. I myself am a theistic evolutionist. I think Genesis 1 can be reconciled with evolution, and sources. I don't defend the theory of evolution because I'm not interested in enough to do that. I will only defend theistic evolution insofar as I defend that you can hold to both, and you can even be a biblical inerrantist and hold to an evolutionary view of origins. But like I've had like those in the intelligent design camp, young earthers, try to debate me on the science of evolution, and I'm just like, I don't really care. I care enough about it to listen to debates between, say, Stephen Meyer and an evolutionist, debating it. I'm interested enough to read books about it, but I'm not interested enough to defend the theory myself. But insofar as like the things I recommend to skeptics who or seekers trying to really wrestle through these questions, I think John Walton's book, The Lost World of Genesis 1, is fantastic. John Walton's book, The Lost World of Adam and Eve, was a game changer for me. My main hang up when it came to evolution and Christianity was, what do you do with Adam and Eve? Because even if you can like stretch the days out in Genesis 1, like you still have like, what about how do you do that? John Walton does it perfectly. And what I love the most about it is that he's interpreting the text according to the authorial intent. He's looking at the Hebrew language. He's looking at the ancient Near Eastern context. He's really just trying to get at how the text would have been understood by its original audience, and it just so happens to a happy coincidence. When you interpret the text the way an ancient would, you can affirm or disavow evolution. You're free to follow the science where it leads. I've written a lot about these things on my blog, and I've talked about them on my podcast. So there's some free resources for you to check out there. I would also just check out biologos.org. They've got a lot of helpful content there. So that's usually how I deal with skeptics and the whole creation Genesis issue. I'm like, my guy, this is not a science text. This is a theology text, and it's meant to tell you who created the universe and why you and everything else exists. I like to quote Galileo. The Bible is not meant to tell us how the heavens go. It's meant to tell us how to go to heaven.
Right, and I'd also confirm some of the things Evan was saying there. You can also find a lot of resources with reasons to believe. They're also a good group to. I mean, they're one of our partners. Basically, they always come on whenever we ask and stuff like that. We've had Ross on a few times as well. So, but yeah, you could check them out. And I think these type of questions, and what I suggest to do is it does inspire you to get into further study. Like Evan said, it doesn't change the resurrection, right? It doesn't change this data with the resurrection. We have to make sense of the resurrection, I think, and really look at that and say, okay, well, if this is pretty clear cut, if the evidence is overwhelming for the resurrection, right? maybe I'm not understanding Genesis right, and maybe that should provoke me into further study into those ancient texts. Because I know even on this show, we've had several discussions on it, and a lot of us have different conclusions on it. So,
I was about to say we
yeah,
have a good playlist on this for
yep.
encouraged faith. If you'd like to know, we have a playlist. If you go to our homepage, go to the playlist tab and scroll down, you'll see Young Earth, Old Earth, Creationist playlist. We've got a lot of content on there. We actually have an episode with an astrophysicist who affirms all of the testimony in Genesis. So that might be something that's strikingly relevant for your astrophysicist friend that you're mentioning here too.
Yep, and you can, and if you want to even scroll further backwards to the Pura playlist, we also have a great discussion and debates on it. As far as David Paulman even participated in one. We have uh, Fuzz Rana, evolution, or no, he's a he's something. He's with Reasons to Believe. What's that?
He's a biochemist.
Biochemist, yeah, he's that. We have several RTB people on there discussing different aspects. So you can just scroll those archives, and like Evan said, you could go to his website as well and look up at Cerebral Faith. There's a plug for him as well, and Dale Glover, the Canadian. If you want Canadian style stuff, you could go to his website as well. Real Seekers, right?
And I was just gonna say, do you guys? Because I was talking to him in the chat. He's kind of interested in fine tuning arguments to that deals with astrophysics. Do you guys have on Pora and Faith Unaltered good shows about the fine tuning argument that might be helpful?
I know that came up. I know that came up on the episode where Dr. Ross was on.
Also, I do have a couple discussions as well with Travis Worth and some
Oh,
debates
that's
he
right.
did
Yeah,
that
Travis.
it dealt with fine tuning arguments because he was really interested in those. So,
Yeah,
yep.
I have some stuff on fine tuning as well on my website, on my blog, podcast. I just want to say, like, theistic evolutionists like myself, we actually do use some design arguments, cosmic fine tuning, local fine tuning. We like to use those. I use the Kalam cosmological argument. So, because when I was first looking into theistic evolution, I was under the impression that like none of them want to use. It's true to some with some of them. Some of them are just they're so traumatized by their young Earth creation science background, like they just don't want to try to use science to make a case for theism. But when I read Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, I was pleasantly surprised to see that he employed the cosmological argument and the fine tuning argument to establish the existence of God. We just wouldn't use things like maybe, irreducible complexity or something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mentioned already on Real Seekers tomorrow, I'm doing a debate on the existence of God. And Travis Worth is going to be my debate partner. And he's actually going to be covering Trent Doherty's version of the fine tuning argument. So check that out. And hopefully that'll be good for her. I got her pronoun right this time. So.
Right on.
Well,
right on.
I actually had one question that I was interested in because it's kind of been mulling around in the back of my head. We've been talking about a couple of things, and it doesn't seem like it comes up quite as much as some other objections. Kind of want to throw the wrench in the gears here. What do we do with the mention of Christ doing things like appearing without walking through a door and somehow perhaps walking through a wall or materializing in some sense within a room without having to make an entrance? What do we make of something like that in terms of your like expanded case here? Is that something that you would also include in that in any sense, or is that something that's kind of like an elephant in the room?
What I would say is, well, I mean, first, like if they're trying to like use that to try to argue that Jesus was a ghost or something, then I'm like, well, you can't just cherry pick the data. Like they also describe Jesus doing very physical things like eating and being touched. And
Right. I guess I'm coming from the opposite pole.
Yeah.
There is kind of like assuming that he's physical and he resurrected physically from the dead and his scars are present and everything. And then he materializes in a room without needing an entrance or perhaps walks through a wall. What gives? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that would be the second part is like, why is Jesus doing this? Well, one thing might just be, well, he's Jesus. He's done a lot of miraculous things. Yeah, but also
Here, here.
that may be the nature of the resurrection body. This is you
Hmm.
go to Paul in First Corinthians, and he talks about how different the body at the resurrection is going to be. It's going to be such a superior sort of body. Maybe we'll all have that ability when Christ comes back and we're raised from the dead. That may just be the nature of that body. Neil Mauman, he wrote a book a long time ago called Who is Agent X, and he talked about how maybe Jesus is able to just you know slip through more than just three dimensions in order to kind of circumvent that. Just like you might, if you have a square on a paper, you can't get inside the square if you stay in two dimensions. But if you go into the third dimension and then go back into the two-dimensional world, you're able to go in there.
Right,
Josh,
right. And I would just
no,
answer it like this. I would say this too.
Mhm.
Once you establish the proof and the case for the resurrection, at that point you take the gospel into its total account and you're dealing with God. And God can do anything he wants. God can appear in a room because you've already established that. You've established that miracles are possible. You're establishing that this man is God himself. Uh, Man, I mean, he's God. So
and
that's the way I would
Josh,
do it.
just because this is relevant to my studies on the Shroud of Turin, right? When
Oh,
the
cool.
body at the moment of the resurrection, the body becomes, physicists call it mechanically transparent is the technical term, and
Ooh.
that's how he can pass through walls and that sort of thing. So yeah, physicists actually have a term for it. So
Is that like becoming light or something?
becoming what?
Becoming light or something?
No, that's would be physically impossible. That would lead to like a nuclear explosion.
Explosion.
Well, no, I don't mean like becoming like a sun or something. I mean like what do you mean by what was the term you used?
Mechanically transparent.
Mechanically transparent. What would that mean?
So it's just he's able to pass through physical stuff that you wouldn't normally be able to do because he's like he's transparent on that respect. Like the mechanics of physics don't affect him the same way.
Interesting.
I can
So
send
it's
you
like a suspension of physics as like a law and kind of it's that I'll have to think about that.
It's
I'm not sure I
interesting.
understood that.
I'll send you the thing from Bob Rucker because he's a
Okay.
nuclear engineer, so he actually discusses that. So it's beyond
Interesting.
my
Okay.
grade.
Right
Cool.
on.
Thank you.
Well, guys, this is the end of our journey here. Thank you again, Evan. And if you could just plug your websites and stuff like that again, that would be great.
Yeah, my website is cerebralfaith.net. It's the source of all my content. I used to make all kinds of different content, but for reasons I go into in the final episode of my podcast, the Cerebral Faith podcast, I've just gone back to blogging, which is why my little tab label here beneath my name says blogger at cerebralfaith.net. But the content I did make is still up there, and I'm not gonna take it down. But you can get all my blog articles. You can access the podcast there. You can see YouTube videos that I've made, including live stream presentations and debates that I've hosted. We talked about creation and evolution earlier. I had Fuzz Rana of Reasons to Believe on my channel, and he debated Aaron Yilmaz. Aaron Yilmaz is not that well known, but he wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evolution. He's a Christian, and it was actually his book that convinced me that the science of evolution is sound. And I was like, I want the best defender of evolution to go up against the best opponent of evolution, and I couldn't think of anyone better than those two guys. And it was a really good debate. One of my favorite debates on the podcast and on the channel. There's a lot of good. I've covered a wide range of topics. I'm kind of like Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. I just cover like basically anything that is relevant to a healthy intellectual Christian life. So I cover arguments for God's existence, the minimal facts argument, the maximal data argument for the resurrection of Jesus. I talk about the problem of evil. I talk about creation and evolution. I talk about, just all kinds of things. And you can get that on cerebralfaith.net.
You'll have to check out your problem of evil stuff because that's what my thesis is going to be on. So, but yeah,
Right
Dale,
on in.
you got a debate tomorrow. Tell us what's going on at Real Seekers.
Yeah, with Travis.
Yeah, good old Travis. So yeah, it's at 1 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow on my channel, Real Seekers. I can broadcast it on Faith and Altar too if you want. I don't care what people see it as long as they watch it. But yeah, it's going to be, so me and Travis are the two Christians. So I'm going to be arguing the modal ontological argument, and Travis is handling Trent Doherty's fine tuning argument. Then we've got two atheists. So David Johnson, who Evan debated a couple years ago, he's doing the hiddenness of God. And then we have Jordan from the Recent Doubt podcast doing the problem of evil. So we're going to be covering four arguments, 2 for and 2 against the existence of God. So yeah.
Right on, right on. Josh, you got next week, brother.
Next week, yeah, we got Cosmic Corner. Got a couple of guys coming on again to talk about. Let's say we're gonna expand our conversation about what is a spirit, how not to participate in the wrong spirit, but also we're gonna talk about how there's a kind of narrative theme that plays into not only a lot of old literature, but now almost most of our entertainment is kind of based on themes and motifs like this that include vampirism, and we're going to talk about that in relation to how, let's say, an evil spirit is operating and kind of latching on and leeching from, and so that kind of thing, but from an angle that I think people would probably not expect. So that's going to be a fun time if anybody wants to hang out for that, or that sounds interesting to you. That's what we'll be discussing next week on Friday
So,
also.
Josh, do you have a problem with people romanticizing the vampire in this culture these days?
In the way that it's become
Yeah,
romanticized, yes.
yeah,
I do. I think that that's a problem.
yeah.
Not just in the, let's say, like Harlequin novel female fantasy sort of way, but also in the way that let's say in the larger scope, things that are more macabre and dark and things like that become something that become like a full aesthetic for a person, having
Right.
come from a background where those were the people that I was around and hung out with and participated with. I can see the way that it kind of meshes itself with the way you view everything. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I can see that while it's like having an infatuation with darkness is one thing, but being kind of like making that your identity is a whole other thing. And I think that in itself is an act of vampirism of some sort.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it actually, it bleeds over because people are
Yeah.
interested or not are influenced, should I say, by those type of things. And for a
Oh
young
yeah.
person, even, it can take them by storm, and we
Hmm.
get all sorts of different things coming from that. So I see where you're coming from, absolutely. But yeah, guys, after that, we've got Philip Carey coming on to discuss the classical of view of the problem of evil, which he actually is in the Four Views book uh, uh, on that very thing. So we're going to be talking about that. I'll probably be throwing some questions about uh, a little bit about my theory and stuff like that. So if you want to hear that, jump on because I'll be running some stuff by him as well because I do think the classical view does hold a lot of weight in what the ancients thought about it. So yeah, uh, we hope that you enjoyed tonight's episode, and we will be back next week. Hopefully, Tyler will be back on soon. We don't know how long he's going to take. I think he said a month. So he's spending some time and getting some well needed rest with his family. So keep them in prayer, and we'll see you guys next week. So good night. God bless. And as Tyler says, stay like Christ.